Mai haere mai, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Tamura, Director of Regional Transport Connections at Waikato Regional Council. I'll be your host this evening, and I'll be joined shortly by Councillors Dennis Tegg, Angela Strange and Hugh Vercoe. I'd just like to start by acknowledging them for making the time to be here this evening, and the staff that are here with us, supporting us as well and have made this all happen. And of course, thanks to everybody at home for making the time to joining us. Unfortunately, our chair, Russ Remington, wasn't able to be with us tonight. As you will know, we're currently consulting on some proposals around public transport in Thames-Coromandel, Hauraki and Matamata-Piako districts until the end of April. This webinar is your opportunity to find out a bit more about them and ask myself and our councillors any questions you might have. A little bit about how the session will work. The way the session will go is that I'll be introducing our councillors. We'll give you a bit of an overview about what we're proposing. We'll spend as much time as we can on the Q&A segment, where we'll aim to answer as many of your questions as we can. And at the end, I'll wrap up with just a little bit of information about how you can make a formal submission. Before we get underway properly though, just letting you know about the platform that we're using. Hopefully you're familiar with it, Microsoft Teams. The webinar is being recorded and we will be uploading it to our website in the next day or so for people that are unable to attend. Don't worry, there's no risk of you making an unexpected cameo. Also, to help us ensure good connectivity and video quality for everybody, you won't be able to turn your audio or video on during the sessions. So we're encouraging you to submit your questions at any time through the Q&A part of the app. My colleague Wendy will be assisting and collating those for us and introducing them to us when we get to the Q&A session. We expect that the whole thing shouldn't last more than an hour. To make sure we keep on time, we'll ask, please do keep all questions respectful and on topic. And if you have any questions that aren't related to the proposals we're discussing tonight, then as always, you can direct those to our councillors outside of the session. Their contact information is available on our website, waikatoregion.govt.nz, and that information will come up at the tail end of the presentation as well. To access the Q&A functionality, it may look a little bit different for you depending on what type of device you're joining us from. If you're on a laptop, you may be able to see it in the navigation bar, but if you're on your phone, you'll need to click the 3 dots symbol to expand your options. It does mean that you need to be using the app in order to ask a Q&A. So if you've joined via the app, that's the way to do it. If you're only here to listen, there's no worries joining it on the web alone. If you would like to ask questions, I'd encourage you just to pop off quickly, download the app from the App Store. Once you have it, the easiest way to rejoin us is via the link in the Teams confirmation email you received after you registered. I hope that works for you. Okay, we'll get into it then. I think it's it really says something about the importance of the topic that we've got our councillors joining us tonight. And I'll start by introducing Regional Connections Committee Chair, Angela Strange. And then please, could each councillor hand over to the next in no particular order after Angela. We'll go to Councillor Vercoe and then Councillor Tegg. Councillor Angela, perhaps you'd like to kick us off with a brief explanation of your role and your interest in the proposal.
Thanks, Mark. Kia ora, I'm Angela Strange, Chair of the Regional Connections Committee and also Waikato Regional Councillor for the Hamilton constituency. I'm really excited to be here tonight because I'm a big believer in the value of public transport and its potential to make Waikato even better for everyone who lives here. As councillors, we regularly hear from our constituents, from our residents, and we think that there's real demand for better connectivity and more environmentally friendly options. As a region, we're grappling with local impacts of huge global issues like climate change and the economic after effects we'll continue to see as a result of COVID-19. It's a challenging time for all of us, but we're up to the challenge and we're committed to keeping our region moving. We can do this by investing in better transport, and that means we give more people options to get around. Having fewer cars on the road helps reduce our carbon footprint as well, which is good for the communities. It's good for the environment and it's good for the economy. And that's what we're all about here at the Regional Council. In my role as committee chair, I've been closely involved in the development of these proposals and also in the wider regional public transport review. We've been working on this to improve connectivity across our whole region. And these proposals we're looking at tonight have actually been brought forward from the wider review. So we're doing this as an amendment to our long-term plan. And as councillors, we really think that public transport can do so much to improve outcomes in our communities. It can be a lifeline for some people, giving people access to work, leisure opportunities, social services, education. But we want to know what you think. We want to make sure that what we're proposing really fits your needs and is a good fit for our communities. And we want you to have all the information that you need to make an informed decision. I'll pass it over to Councillor Hugh.
And good evening, everybody, and thank you for taking time out to attend this presentation here tonight. I'm Hugh Verco, and tonight I thought what I'd do was talk to you a little bit about how the proposal will affect Matamata-Piako district. With the Regional Council, I chair the Regional Transport Committee, but I did serve for 15 years as District Mayor of Matamata-Piako. So I do have an intimate knowledge of how the system works for passenger transport within the Matamata-Piako area. And the first thing I would comment on is the funding. The funding under the current system is very, very complicated. And if you take, for instance, the cost of the service that goes from Wairoa through to Arawa, into Morrinsville and across to Hamilton, that is shared 50% by the New Zealand Transport Agency, with the balance being shared between Hauraki District Council, Matamata-Piako District Council, and Hamilton City Council. So it's extremely difficult to have any changes to the system, and anything that wanted to add to it or alter it is difficult because you've got to get all those parties to agree to what's going on there. There's also within Matamata-Piako considerable pushback, especially from the college principals. They see that the services running from, for instance, Morrinsville, that is taking the brighter students away from their college to a perceived better college in Hamilton. So they oppose it. They oppose it even more when you tell them that they're actually helping to pay for the service for those who live in Morrinsville, and they pay for it through their rates. So if Matamata-Piako wanted to do any additional services or any changes under the current arrangement, it simply doesn't work. It's in the too hard box. If you look again under the current system, the local council is responsible for maintaining and providing the bus shelters that are there. I speak about Morrinsville, the town that I live in, and it is very, very basic. And if you suggest to the council that they should make it more user-friendly and that they should do something there, the answer is no money, no priority, so nothing happens. So the proposal is to change the funding basis from that very complicated model to one where the Regional Council will rate exactly the same dollar amount for Matamata-Piako ratepayers as is currently happening at the moment. For those people living in Matamata-Piako, don't get carried away and think that you're going to see a sudden reduction in your rates from Matamata-Piako District Council, because you probably won't notice the drop. And by the same token, you probably won't notice when the Regional Council takes that small amount and adds it to your Regional Council bill. So it makes sense that the Regional Council that manages the contracts should also manage the funding. I'm supportive of the change and happy to answer any questions. Yes.
So thanks, Hugh. Kia ora, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. So I'm Dennis Tegg, your Regional Councillor representing the Thames-Coromandel constituency. For anyone that lives in the Coromandel or is just even passing through, it's pretty plain to see that we need better transport, and it's the same in Hauraki. And along with Matamata-Piako, these districts really form a joined up eastern corridor where joined up services make a lot of sense. And then when it comes to climate change, well, we really have to work with urgency on that major issue. Now, I've been an advocate for public transport for many years. In fact, I initiated the Thames bus service in 2017, and it looks like that's been a great success, and I've seen the benefits that it brings to our community. So I was keen to see those benefits replicated elsewhere in Thames-Coromandel and Hauraki. And that's why in the last couple of years, I've been taking soundings in our community, and I've asked our expert transport staff, to come up with some scoping of options and some interim costings. And in a way, that's laid the groundwork for this current proposal. And I've also had great support from fellow councillors, and in particular Angela Strange, who you've just heard from. So there's a couple other things I wanted to touch on. One was the importance of public participation. And so today we're not just talking about proposed changes to the bus routes, and as Hugh's just mentioned, but also the way it's funded. But before we get into that detail, I thought it's also important to point out the value of what we're doing here and now. So, as councillors, we work for you. We're elected to represent your interest. And that's why public consultation and sessions like this are so important. It's democracy in action. It's about making sure we're checking in to make sure we're heading down the right road, to sort of use a pun. And it's about listening to residents to help, understand, what's happening. So as councillors, we really need to keep our fingers on the pulse of our communities. So when we say it, we mean it. Your voice really matters. So now I'll hand over to Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis, and thanks to Councillors Vercoe and Strange for setting the scene for us. I'll now share a presentation with you. As I said before, we'll try and get through it as quickly as we can to get as much time left for the Q&A session. The presentation may take around 30 minutes. And the first little slide I'm going to pass over to Angela Strange for, Chair of Regional Connections Committee. You're probably best placed to talk to that next slide, and then I'll pick things up from there.
Thanks, Mark. All right, slide 3 shows us the regional transport review and how these proposals came about. So to help everyone at home get a better sense of how we got to this point, I'll just lay the groundwork. As a council, we've been looking at the wider, a big strategic review of our region-wide public transport network, and Director Mark has been doing a great job leading that at a staff level and making sure all of the technical aspects fall into place. And it's really a crucial piece of work because it will provide a joined up strategic vision for a whole regional transport network. You can see on the slide below how plans for this network are taking shape in the circle to the right. And as councillors, we really saw an opportunity to bring some aspects of that work forward. We believe that the residents in Thames-Coromandel and Hauraki districts in particular want better public transport, and we as a council want to be really responsive to that. So as you can see, as we look at the zoomed in eastern section of that network, it also makes sense for Matamata-Piako, Thames and Hauraki to be first. These areas represent an interlinked arm of our plans for the future regional transport network. And we think that connections here need improving sooner rather than later, which is why plans for this part of the network are at a much more advanced stage than there are for other areas. So that's how we got here, and the exciting thing though is where we're going to next. And to explain that, I'll hand back to Mark, our Regional Transport Connections Director. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Angela. It's really good to have that context of how we got here and where the consultation fits into the bigger picture. So a bit about the proposals. First, I guess the first part of it is that we're proposing new services in Thames-Coromandel and Hauraki districts, which we would need to collect additional funding for. And second, we're proposing that Waikato Regional Council should rate for public transport in Thames-Coromandel, Hauraki and Matamata-Piako districts in the place of those district councils, exactly the way that Councillor Vercoe outlined before. The funding side of this is important because it would enable us to create new routes much more efficiently in the future. That just means we can be more responsive to the needs of communities. Because we're proposing to bring services in Thames-Coromandel and Hauraki forward earlier than planned, we also need to understand whether you would support new services only if we could secure our funding contribution from Waikato New Zealand Funding Agency, or even if you as ratepayers were to fund the full public share. As Councillor Verco said before, 51% of funding is generally secured from Waikato. Would it be appropriate if that full share of that was to be covered locally? So the funding, I'll explain what I mean by that in just a moment. The funding picture is a little complicated, but it is important because it affects how much you'd pay for services through your rates, and that might of course influence whether you support them or not. Hopefully this slide helps in explaining. You have the total cost there on the left, what it actually costs to keep the buses running, and moving across you'll see that passenger fares cover roughly a third of that. Then you have the public subsidy share I mentioned previously, and that's made up of funding from Waikato, New Zealand Transport Agency, and from rates, the local share that you currently pay for. It's worth mentioning at this point that it's here that the Regional Council actually provide the public transport services across the Waikato. In Hamilton, that's pretty straightforward. We collect the full local share of rates, we provide the services. Outside Hamilton, though, it does get more complicated. If the bus service is completely within one district, the local share is funded through rates collected by that district and passed through to us. If they connect between Hamilton and surrounding districts, then the local share is split between us and the District Council. But at the end of the day, we're still past the funding to deliver the services. It's complicated and too complicated, and it doesn't need to be that way. That's why we're proposing to rate for public transport in Thames-Coromandel, Hauraki and Matamata-Piako districts in place of those district councils. This would improve the administrative efficiency of public funding of the funding process and our future route planning. The aim in the long run through our regional public transport review is to have all bus services paid for and rated at a regional council level, because we believe this would enable us to more effectively deliver higher quality public transport moving forward. That will take time. We're proposing to put these proposals to you first, as we think this is one of the real areas of benefit this is one of the areas that will benefit most from the changes. Particularly as these districts will be serviced by an integrated eastern arm of our service, as Councillor Strange mentioned, and because so many existing services in these areas already cross district boundaries. So hopefully that gives you a better insight into the issues we want to resolve, but how would we do it? Well, the total amount that we would collect through rates to fund these existing services in place of 3 district councils, there is $242,000 a year. We'll get the picture for you of the rates shortly. This will be collected through targeted rates, with 80% of that coming from the urban areas directly benefiting from the service, and the remaining 20% collected from all properties across the district. We would no longer receive funding from the relevant district councils, just clarifying that again, to cover that cost, instead collecting it directly ourselves through those regional rates. This is an interim funding policy we want to roll out, and we want to roll it out early to make sure we're in a position to provide new services in the eastern arm of the district as quickly as we can. Further work is planned to develop a region-wide funding policy for public transport services, and we think it could work in a similar way. And as we saw on the previous slide, Waikato New Zealand Transport Agency currently funds 51% of the cost of existing services in these districts. For the new routes we're proposing in Hauraki and Thames-Coromandel, though, I just want to emphasise that at this point, the funding share from Waikato is not yet guaranteed. Funding assistance would be requested and is being requested from the Transport Agency to fund 51% of those service costs. If they are unable to provide that funding and we are unable to secure an alternative source, for example, other central government funding, ratepayers would bear the full cost of that public subsidy share for those new services. You'll remember that this is around 2/3 of the total amount, with the rest coming from bus fares. Now, though, I just want to take you through some quick examples so you can see the kind of rates increases you might expect if we were to go ahead with these different options. So, what would it mean for rates? Well, this table highlights the impact of the rating transfer only from your district to your regional council. On the far left, you can see the rating impacts are separated by the district you live in. Then you can see it differs depending on whether you're in a district, whether you're a direct or indirect beneficiary. Of course, we all benefit from having bus services operating in our local area, whether that's directly or indirectly. The direct benefits include the increased connectivity and convenience of having a service nearby for those close to a route. Indirect benefits are those that might be the economic, social, environmental benefits of having public transport options for those that don't have a vehicle and for the environment. Having more buses on our roads instead of cars means less congestion and less pollution for everybody. So everyone in the district is considered an indirect beneficiary, but those living in the urban areas that are connected by services are also considered direct beneficiaries. So I hope that's reasonably clear. So this means that direct beneficiaries, just to make that point again, pay both the direct and indirect share. And then you see that the rating impact differs depending on the capital value of your property. You can find the exact rating impact on your property using the rates calculator available on our website, which I think will be there from about the 22nd of April. And if you want to have another look at this at a later date, you can find this and the others I'll be going through online in our consultation document. It's all available at waikatoregion.govt/Your Voice Matters. Here are the costs if we proceed with new services in Thames-Coromandel and Hauraki, and if Waikato Kotahi were to fund the 51% of costs of running those services, or if we were able to secure equivalent funding from somewhere else. Just give you a minute to absorb those. You can see that there's no cost to Matamata-Piako, as the benefits of the new service, the new route proposals will be for Thames-Coromandel and Hauraki. And here's the cost if we were unable to secure 51% of the funding from Waikato Kotahi or another source. Again, all these figures are in the consultation document, if you didn't catch them in that last slide or in this one. And as we'd expect, the impact on affected residents' rate bills has roughly doubled. As we said, 51% of the share regularly comes from Waikato Kotahi. And as anyone living in these areas would be collectively paying 100% of that share rather than 49%. Again, the figures are all in the consultation document. Okay, so that's the funding side, but what can you expect in return? Well, of course, as well as the transfer of rating responsibilities, we're proposing new services in Thames-Coromandel and Hauraki. These would be implemented. Implementation of these services wouldn't be before 1 January 2023. And rates will be charged for those services and existing ones as part of the charges you receive in September. For the 2022-23 financial year, you'll be paying for 6 months worth of services. To fill in the gap in public transport services for Thames and surrounding towns, we're proposing a bus service to connect the urban area and rural centres across the Thames-Coromandel and Hauraki districts to Thames. This will provide access to essential services and, of course, those recreational opportunities. If this proposal was successful, we'd consult further with the community about the particulars, including things like the times of operation, walking options, detailed routes, those types of things. For Hauraki connections, we're proposing to establish a bus service from Waihi Beach to Waihi Township and from Waihi Township to Paeroa. This would see a bus running between Waihi and Paeroa roughly every 2 hours, catering for commuters and other users throughout the day. We're also proposing to establish a morning and afternoon return service from Thames to Te Aroha. This would provide a connection to the current service from Te Aroha to Hamilton. It would also provide a connection in the opposite direction for commuters from Ngatea and Paeroa into Thames. And again, if the proposal were to go ahead, we'd want to consult on these particulars of the service, make sure they meet your needs, make sure we get the route and timing absolutely correct. So we think these routes would provide a convenient and efficient way for communities in these areas to get around, particularly those that might not have other options. And as has been noted earlier in the session, we see some really good environmental and economic benefits coming out of this sort of targeted and strategic investment. Just to clarify again, for Matamata-Piako, we aren't currently proposing any additional services specific to Matamata-Piako district. And this is really just because the work in Thames-Coromandel and Hauraki is more advanced at the moment, and connectivity between these areas is more limited. However, taking over the rating for existing services in Matamata-Piako would simplify existing funding arrangements, as I and Councillor Vico mentioned previously. It would enable us to more easily expand services in the future based on community need and appetite. Again, it would seek the views of affected residents if and when new services were proposed. So that's where the proposed routes would go. And as I say, if they were to go forward, we want to consult in more detail with affected communities around how they should operate. But what are the local benefits? And to answer that, before we head to the Q&A, I'd just like to hand back to Councillor Tegg. Over to you, Dennis.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'd just like to talk about the benefits just from my experience with what's happened in Thames. As I mentioned, we've had some pretty good feedback from that service, which has now been running for several years. So one of the things that I think is quite unique about Thames-Coromandel and Hauraki in particular is that already 30% of the population is aged over 65. And it's projected to get to 50% in a few decades. And of course, the aged is the demographic, what the transport boffins call someone who's transport disadvantaged. So what that basically means in most cases is that people have lost their license. And if an elderly person loses their license, or even someone with a disability, that can be life-changing, really. And often you'll find that people in that situation can almost be trapped in their own homes. And I'll just give you an anecdote of one example I had of how life-changing the bus service in Thames can be. So I was aware of a couple, and unfortunately, one of the partners had to take up residence in a rest home, and the other one stayed at home. But the partner staying at home had lost her license. So for many months, she was not actually even able to visit her own spouse at the other end of the town, and now she can. And so that's just an example of how vital public transport can be. And for other people, just even making a hospital visit to see a friend or relative in hospital has been difficult, or to get to the doctor even. So really overall, one of the major benefits of public transport is that whole social connectivity. And I don't think you can really put a price on that, although, as always, someone has tried to, and I see Mark's put a note here that there's a 3.5 billion cost nationwide of, being the cost of exclusion from society. But apart from the social connectivity side of things, there's also some other benefits. And, if you own a shop in the centre of town, then there's that added sort of foot traffic that you get from people being able to come into the shop where they can use public transport when maybe they would have gone online, or the need to get healthcare, and there's a much more efficient appointment basis because people can actually make their appointments. And and then there's jobs. So there's some bus drivers involved. You save on expensive car parks. And then, of course, it can contribute to road safety. So getting people out of cars and into safer forms of transport. And, if you're elderly, maybe a less confident driver as you age, then there's that alternative way of getting around. So overall, from my experience, I think that I've seen multiple benefits, and that's even from those who don't use the service. And there's plenty of examples of the way that can operate. So hopefully that's a bit of a, an oversight of what I've observed. And back to you, Mark. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Teague. So that does bring us through to the Q&A segment. There we go. That brings us to the Q&A segment. Thanks to everyone that's been busy submitting questions already. Wendy has been collating those. And if you haven't done so now, now is your chance to find that Q&A button on your Teams app or the three dots if you're accessing it on a mobile device. If you're on an Apple device, I think it's a swipe left to navigate between the presentation and the Q&A session. Android users just have the back button, and I think PC users have both. Right, so I will, I'll look over to Wendy and see what questions we've got.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. We have had one question come through regarding the direct versus indirect rating. How far away would that be? For example, if a bus went to Coromandel Town, what sort of radius would be drawn around Coromandel Town to determine direct or indirect rating charges, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it does. That's a great question, and it's one that's really important and dear to people. So I'll grab this one. It's a little bit more technical in nature. The area that we'd be considering the area of direct benefit are the urban areas through which the services pass. So the areas that are serviced by the urban areas that are serviced by public transport services. The indirect area is the wider district. So that also, just to clarify, as we tried to earlier as well, the indirect benefit, that indirect rate, that applies to everybody. The direct benefit rate applies to the urban areas through which the services pass. So it's not strictly a measure of distance from the route or the bus stop.
Thanks, Mark. We've got another question from somebody who's interested to know more about the demand-driven services proposed. How would these work?
Yeah, so the way in which the demand responsive services, we call them, we've got a name for them now, Flex, the way that they operate, and we're learning as we go, but at the moment they're bookable within an area via an app. They collect you from corner and drop you off at a corner close to your destination. That's the design of the service. So it's a corner-to-corner service, which differentiates it from some of those other rideshare services or a taxi, or indeed things like total mobility for those people that access that service. This is a corner-to-corner type service. Again, though, the way in which those types of services are configured, whether they orient around a particular destination, as we have with one of our services in Hamilton at the moment, taking people through to the airport, those services are, hence the name, quite flexible, and so we can design the service to meet the needs of the local communities.
Thanks. And are you able to provide a definition of urban? Many small towns, there are many small towns on the peninsula.
Yep, great question. So we basically use, and of course all of this is, we welcome submissions on it, but what we use at the moment is the Statistics New Zealand urban areas. That's what we're using for the purpose of this rating. Now that's derived over time from district plan zones. It does lag a bit behind district plan zones. District plans are made and changed over time. That filters through Stats New Zealand, and that gives us a nice nationally consistent, or in our case regionally consistent map to work from. I just emphasise though, it's those urban areas through which services go. So if you're in a rural town, let's say Colville or something like that, that's not connected by a public transport service, there's a very small urban area up there in Colville, you wouldn't be subject to the direct beneficiary rate.
Thanks, Mark. There are no more questions in the Q&A. However, we did receive some ahead of today's webinar, and so we will go through a couple of those. So there's one here asking, considering the hospital for our region is in Hamilton, why don't we have a bus service to Hamilton? The elderly up the coast also have no way of getting into town because the shuttle does not go that far, and they have to rely on having a car or on the generosity of neighbours and friends.
Thanks a lot for whomever posted that question. Yeah, we are constantly working with District Health Board, and I might pass over to Councillor Strange to provide a little bit more commentary on the kind of work that we're doing with the Health Board. But in terms of the reasons why these services might not have been established yet, it's really because it's very difficult for us to provide the old style of public transport service for a very small number of people. That's why we have been working on things like health shuttles. And perhaps Councillor Strange might like to talk to the community transport stuff that has also been established through, or will be established through this annual plan to meet just those kinds of needs.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, great question. Yeah, the traditional type bus services are quite rigid. So as Mark said, community transport is a great way to meet those needs for hospital appointments. And we really see the benefit of these services throughout the region. Often they're run by volunteers, and yeah, people out of the goodness of their hearts, you know, spend their time fundraising to support their local community and to support those who have really no other choice to get to health appointments outside of where they live, usually in Hamilton, as you've said. So as a council, we really saw that need to support community transport within the wider region. So that's why as a council, we voted to establish a contestable 200,000 per annum community transport fund that providers, such as we find in every community throughout our region, can apply to for any funding that they might need towards their operating costs. So we're really excited to get that going this year and to support all those volunteers throughout our whole region. So that fund will be funded through a flat charge per property of approximately $1 per year. So it's through a uniform annual general charge on your rates. And we believe that this will give our amazing volunteer services a more consistent and reliable way to continue to do what they do best. So I hope that answers your question, and I'll hand it back to Wendy. Thank you, Wendy.
Thanks, Councillor. We've got another question that's come through the Q&A. Do you have a gut feeling about the Transport Agency's reaction to the proposal?
I think the Transport Agency is very clear in that it's really keen to try and expand the availability of public transport services around the country. The challenge that the Transport Agency have is a similar challenge that many agencies have had, which is a lack of revenue in their case into the National Land Transport Fund in recent times that hasn't matched the expenditure out of the fund. And that's put all of us in quite a tight funding situation. We know that over time, money gets reallocated. Money that's unspent in one place may become available for something else, and I'm sure they'd look favourably on a proposal that received a strong level of public support, and we'll continue to advocate for that, be it through this process or others.
Thanks. We've got another question that's come through. Are you looking at electric or hybrid options? Is there anything available in this space?
Yes, in fact we are, and we are in our, we regularly have to re-tender for bus public transport service contracts, and it's becoming part of our norm to request proposals that provide zero emission options as part of those proposals. In fact, the government itself has made some statements. Waka Kotahi has an expectation that there will be that all vehicles post 2025 that are entering the public transport fleet will be zero emissions. So we're taking that very seriously. We're currently investigating options for buses, and we expect both the larger and smaller formats. And we are hoping that we'll get some of those rolling quite soon as part of some of the other tenders running around the region.
Thanks. And we've got another question. Can you please define what do you mean by on-demand service?
Yes, so on-demand service, kind of thing you're probably most familiar with if you've had access to it or used it, is Uber. That's the type of service offering that it is. However, it's a shared service. It is a public transport service rather than a private service. So that's really what it is. By definition, on demand, it arrives within a certain window after you've requested a service. It would come to a corner closest to you. There's a facility that if you were less physically able, it could come to the end of your driveway as well. And then it would take you to your destination of choice. It would optimize the route using some quite clever technology to collect people along the way who also needed to go to similar places. And there are some tolerances built in to that in terms of how long your journey might take, so that it doesn't take too long for you to get from A to B. That's really what a public on-demand service is.
We've got another question that's popped up. Is it safe to assume that the existing service in Thames, the Thames Connector, will be included in this proposal? There is a little bit of confusion with this service as it's currently still defined as a trial, and Waikato have dropped funding for some existing public transport services, it's believed, but not trials.
Yeah, great question. You're absolutely correct that the Thames Connector service is still under the classification of a trial. We don't have any indication that the funding on that trial basis, which is really, I think, reflecting the ability of Waka Kotahi to commit to long-term funding. But we haven't had any indications so far that funding might be removed. And I think, this might be something that Councillor Teague might want to speak to. We understand that the service is valued highly by the local community. Councillor Teague, you might be in a good place to reflect some of that sentiment.
Yes, thanks, Mark. My understanding is that the service will be up for re-tender very shortly in the next few months, and the contract would be, I think, extended till 2024. I think, Mark, have I got that date right? Yeah. So I think it's in the immediate future, there's no prospect of it, not continuing. Yeah.
We've got another question just going back to on-demand services. Do we currently have them in operation in Hamilton or elsewhere?
Yes, we do. We have a couple of on-demand services up and running at the moment. We have a replacement for what used to be the Night Rider bus service that's now running on a demand responsive basis to take people in and out of the CBD in the evening. And we're also operating out to the airport from the transport centre. Now that's from a fixed point to a fixed point, but the frequency of that is on a demand basis using the same technology.
Thanks, Mark. We've got no more questions that have popped up, but we do have a couple more from the questions that came through prior to tonight's webinar. So just going back to those, there were several people that commented on public transport not being beneficial to everyone, regardless of where they use it. Regardless of whether they use it.
I think that's. I think there's a real. I hope we went into a little bit, and Councillor Teague spoke really about, and Councillor Strange earlier about some of the other benefits that public transport brings to those people who might be what we would call indirect beneficiaries, which include, I guess, the environment as an indirect beneficiary as well. I might pass back to Councillor Strange to go into that in a little bit more depth.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, as Mark said, if you're only considering the direct benefits, it's, you could quite possibly view it as quite black and white. However, if you're a car user and you see more buses on the road that are full of people, then obviously you might see less cars as well. So it'd be less congestion for you as well. So it's great for people and great for the environment. So because buses can move a lot of people more efficiently than the same amount of people individually in their cars as well. It's also, as we've spoken about, those vulnerable users as well. So usually our younger people who can't drive, as well as older people who as well can't drive. So getting those people around safely as well. Statistically, public transport is the safest way to travel. And as a council, we're really promoting, safer connectivity through our region. And it's all about looking after the full community as well. You might not use the bus, but if you use your local shop and most other people are using the bus, then it sort of frees up road space for you to maybe, do the things that you value as well. And also just giving people more options on public transport means that they can access local as well. And we all know what a challenging time our local businesses have had with COVID. And yeah, it would be great to be able to enable more people to support local businesses within their community as well. So we tend to take a broader approach to those direct benefits lens, let's say. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. We've had another question come through. Have you considered bike racks on buses as a way to increase the number of households who could access the proposed new regular bus services?
Indeed, we have, and it's something that is a regular topic of conversation around the Regional Connections Committee table, as Councillor Strange and Councillor Tegg will attest to. And you'll notice that in our regional services, the ones that connect between towns, we do have bike racks on board those. In those urban services, one of the challenges is obviously the loading and unloading times that it takes for people to get their bikes on and off those, which can delay the service and impact the timetable, which impacts its reliability and journey times. In saying that though, we're always open-minded to build services that meet the needs of the local communities. And so we're never closed-minded to those types of things. The Connections Committee talked the other day about, how might things work for school kids, for example, who might scooter or take their skateboards to get the bus, and how can we make that end-to-end journey better for them? So we're constantly looking at and reviewing these types of approaches, and we'd encourage you to make your feedback known if that's something you feel really strongly about, either as part of these services and these proposed services, or for other services generally.
Right, we've had another question as well. Is the current amount received from district council rates sufficient to provide your tabled figures, or has there been an increase applied?
So I would encourage you to have a quick look at the consultation document, and you'll find two tables in that. You'll find one table which is based on the current service levels, and you'll find one that has the increased service levels. For the increased service levels, you'll find two variations of that one. One is if Waka Kotahi provides their 51% share, and the other table is if they do not. So coming back to your question, in order to provide the existing services, there has been no additional increases there beyond what you might normally expect for inflation adjustment and things. So just to make that really clear, there's been no additional increases on top of the service costs for the existing services, as I think Councillor Verco mentioned before when he was specifically mentioning Matamata-Piako district residents. The same applies to Hauraki and Coromandel for those existing services.
Thanks. We've got another question as well. Will proposed new services be accessible for those in wheelchairs?
Yes, so as part of standard public transport contract tendering these days, there is a national standard, and all new public transport contracts are let to that standard. From time to time, because of vehicle availability, everyone's suffering supply chain challenges. The lead time on a new vehicle at the moment is getting up to and at times beyond 9 months. And you can imagine if you want to get a service up and running, you might have to put something in that's not fully up to that standard for a short while. But the intention and the national standard is that all vehicles are fully accessible.
Thanks. And just going back to a couple of the questions that we had beforehand. So looking at the proposed routes, will this mean we will be able to get a bus from Turua to Thames or Paeroa?
I might pass this one over to Councillor Teague. You're as much across the detail of what's proposed here in terms of the service designs as I am.
I'm not sure about that, Mark, but yeah, I'll give it a go. Yes, I think the simple answer is yes, there would be a connection because the service would run from Paeroa through Ngatea and then it would come back out to Turua and on to Thames or vice versa. So I think the short answer is yes, you would have that connection.
Thank you. And just sticking with some of the previous questions, we have somebody who said that a bus to Tauranga, Hamilton and Thames are really needed for things like hospitals, specialists, appointment work as well. Also a town connector going back from Katikati to Waihi later in the day.
I might pass to Councillor Strange for that one.
Thank you, Mark, for that. Yeah, so what we're proposing within this consultation would see a direct coverage service between Thames and Hamilton. There would also be demand responsive services between Paeroa and Waihi, and also between Waihi and Tauranga. But if you remember back to slide 3, way back, back to our future regional transport network concept, it's a long sentence, that would also include proposed future rail services from Hamilton to Morrinsville and then on to Tauranga as well. So that second part isn't covered in this consultation, but it's certainly in future aspirations. Thank you.
And on a similar theme, we also have somebody who believes they badly need a service that comes through Karangahaki. Yeah.
I think as the councillors will point out, all of that feedback is very welcome is welcome through this consultation process. Even if it doesn't directly relate to precisely the services that are set out in the consultation documents, any opportunity for us to hear directly from the community about the services that will meet their needs and needs of their families and friends is absolutely welcome, because if it doesn't inform this, it'll inform the next steps. And as Councillor Strange just set out, we do have some longer term plans, and any opportunity to inform those, any feedback that might inform those is always welcome.
If I could just add in there, I think if you're in Karangahaki, that it would be serviced by the proposal for the connection between Waihi Beach, Waihi and Paeroa. And I think my understanding that during sort of daylight hours that would run about 2 hourly. So I think there would be quite a reasonable service for the gorge there.
Mark, that's all the questions that we have.
Okay, well then we'll wrap up the Q&A, and I will.
Oh.
So I think on Wendy's cue, that's all the time we've got this evening. But thank you for everyone that's taken the time to be here and stick with us until the end. It's great to see that we've still got a decent number of you. But just a quick reminder of what's happening with our consultation. So we'll be consulting until the end of April. 23rd of May, there will be hearings and decision making. This is your opportunity to be personally present, to provide your feedback to councillors if you wish. Just tick that box on the feedback form that says that you wish to be heard. There's a final decision the final decision will be made. Current schedule is on the 20th of June. So whether you had a strong view from the outset of this session or it hopefully helped to clarify some questions that you had, if you want to make a formal submission, here's how you could do that. It's easiest to head to the web page there, waikatoregion.govt.nz/Your Voice Matters. To make a submission or to refresh your memory on the issue, you'll also find copies of the consultation document there, which contains most of what we've discussed tonight. You'll also find some accompanying documents there with a bit more detail if you want to really get stuck into it. You can make a submission by email or post, or you can even hand deliver it to one of our officers if you like. If you do so, please just remember that face coverings must be worn inside all our buildings at the moment. Then, as promised, there's a link to find the contact details of all our councillors, including those that have made the time to join us tonight. Thank you very much to our councillors. Now I'll just hand back to Connections Committee Chair Angela Strange for the last word.
Thanks, Mark, and thank you to the rest of the staff for helping us host an event like tonight. And a big thank you to my fellow councillors, Councillor Dennis Tegg up in Thames-Coromandel and Councillor Hugh Verco in Matamata-Piako. Now, it's the first time that we've run a webinar like this in this format, and we're really excited to do that. So we hope it's been an enjoyable experience for everyone at home and maybe those who are watching the recording at a later time. We're hoping that you found it very useful. So, yep, thank you also to those people who have tuned in tonight and asked questions. Yeah, fantastic questions, and we hope we've clarified a few things for you. And we're really looking forward to your feedback through the submissions process. So please do let us know what you're thinking, and yeah, can't wait to read it all. Thank you very much, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.